Hi guys, Aceface back with another video for you, and I have another Tyranid Tactics video. We've got some more advanced Tyranid Tactics from the Hive Mind, hitting you up with some Genestealer tactics today. One of my favourite units, a great unit to be used within a competitive list, and hopefully this is something you guys are going to find useful. But before I get started, I just want to bring your attention to, if you could, subscribe to the channel. That helps me absolutely tons, so click on that sub button. Also, if you could like this video, again, that helps me. If you want to follow me further, you can catch me on Facebook. I put up all my updates of whether we are going to be filming a Wargaming Weekly, so you can generally catch that there. If you want to see my updates of work in progress and what's on the hobby desk and what's kind of going on in the background, then I'm very, very active on Instagram. And if you want to support me further, you can jump over to my Patreon account and you can pledge and be a Patreon of Aceface. That would be very, very helpful, and it's what really, really helps me to carry on pushing this channel and this hobby to the absolute fullest. And thank you so much for everybody that has pledged and that are backers. You guys are absolute bosses. We've got now some real nice perks for you. You can get yourself some Aceface dice. You can get yourself a new limited edition Aceface t-shirt, which is very cool. I absolutely love it to bits. Can't wait to get mine. That's how new it is still. Also, you can get a great discount off Wargames, my sponsor. Martin's very kindly chucked in a fantastic discount code which you can jump and get hold of too. So loads of cool stuff. There's some other little quirky bits and pieces, and if we get another couple more patrons, I'm going to open up a nice sort of chat server where I can talk to you guys direct, and you can really impact on what we put on the channel, because you guys really support me and I want you to really push the channel where you want it to go. You are my backers, you are my big supporters, and I want to give back to you guys. So lots of exciting stuff coming for those guys that want to pledge as Patreon members. But just dropping by, guys, helps me tons, so thanks for joining this video. Without any further ado, let's jump in there and talk Genestealers. Right, so Genestealers today, and as always I have my trusty codex, so grab yours if you want to kind of follow away and you want to have a little look. If I get anything wrong, quite often do, you know, just jump it in, chuck it in the comments. I'm really interested to hear. Okay, so the Genestealer itself. So the Genestealer was my go-to unit in the index. Now, thankfully, we got lots of boosts of lots of units in the codex, which meant that the Genestealer didn't have to be your be-all and end-all, but there is still some great use for these guys. So Genestealers, and I'm going to run through a little bit of basics, but predominantly this video will focus on more of the advanced tactics and how to use these guys competitively. But let's kind of jump in there anyway and just talk a little bit about basics. So these guys are a troops choice, which is in itself a handy, because it means that you can build a body of your army of these and still build yourself up with some command points, which is really crucial. You want to be building command points, so if you're going for more specialised units, things like Hive Tyrants, things like Biovores, things like Morlocks, things like Hive Guard, things like other units that we will cover in these videos that are really competitive units. What those guys will not give you is they will not give you easy access to command points, whereas Genestealers gives you quite a good foundation to build battalions, to potentially build brigades, even though that probably is going to be a bit expensive. But you can use these guys and you can rack up command points, so that in itself is not a bad thing. From a points point of view, they're not too badly pointed. They are not cheap, which is probably one of their biggest challenges, because as soon as you start to rack these guys up in your army, you are finding that your army is revolving around the Genestealers, and then you do risk when they get taken out. That's a huge chunk of your army. So they aren't that cheap, but they're still affordable enough for you to be able to get quite a few in your list. Now, they're very quick, very quick, and that is their key of everything. You know, we'll talk a lot about their attacks, and about, you know, and how menacing they can be on the table. But ultimately, the probably the biggest strength of the Genestealer is how fast they are, and that's what you need to be thinking about when you're taking these guys in your list. These guys are so mobile and they can get around the board so quickly. That's where probably their biggest strength comes from, because they move 8 inches. But the big key to them moving 8 inches is that they can also advance and still charge. So you could get up to another 6 inches from that advance and they can still charge. So that gives you an idea of how quick they are, and that's straight out of the box. So that's with no increases through, you know, through their hive fleet, no increases through stratagems. That is just how quick they are. Now you can take a Genestealer in a few different ways. You can take a Genestealer with just Rending Claws, which is how they come, or you can give them the Scything Talons as well. So for a start, let's get things real basic. You always want to take the Scything Talons. Now, some people might be a bit fussy with how the model is kind of is modelled, because technically you don't always get enough to be able to do that. But you know, generally you always want to be taking the Scything Talons and the Rending Claws, and a reason why is Rending Claws are normally your weapon of choice because one, they're -1 AP, which is great, but the big thing is you can get that lovely, what used to be the rend, but basically every time you roll a 6, the AP goes to -4, which is really good, because then you're going to shred through pretty much any armour in the game, with the exception of Invons. So that's fantastic. So when you're rolling a big bag of dice, you want to be getting those 6s. But the Scything Talons are not something to be discounted, and the reason why that is because the Scything Talons, even though they don't have a minus, they are AP 0, they do re-roll 1s when you're rolling to hit. And if you're then going against something that is just solely depending on an Invon save, then that rend, that -1, means absolutely nothing. So having a reroll 1s makes it particularly good, and actually then starts to rack your odds of doing damage. So that's why it's always worth taking a bit of both. Now, the flesh hooks are not worth taking generally. You don't want to be worrying about that. Maybe there'll be people that say there's a really good use for them. Chuck them in if you feel there's a good use. The acid maul is something you always want to have. Basically, the acid maul, I'm just going to kind of read it here. For every 4 models in the unit, 1 model may have flesh hooks or 1 model may have an acid maul. And the acid maul is -3 AP, so you might as well have one, because it just means that he's consistently, you know, hitting better, hurting more. So I would tend to have that. It's a free upgrade. You don't pay anything for that acid maul at all, so you might as well have that. You want way to differentiate it in the unit, but basically an acid maul Genestealer. You just want to make sure that you've got them in there, and your opponent can see them. So that's your kind of loadout. Now, there's a few things to bear in mind when you're building these units. So when you get to 10 models in a unit, they get an additional attacks. They go from being attack 3 to attack 4. Now that's really good. That means you are now throwing serious amounts of volume of dice with these guys. But when we're talking about tactics, and we're talking about how to build these guys, don't just build yourself units of 10. So either you're building these guys in very minimums and you're going to take them in tiny little units of 5, or you take them in bigger units. And I would say your minimum unit you want to start at is 15, because if you're taking a unit of 10, you're taking a unit of 11, 12, it's only taking your opponent a very short period of time to take your Genestealers away from having that additional attack, and you need them to have those 4 attacks. You absolutely want them to have that if you're going to use these guys as an assault army, and that's pretty much the only way to use them. There's very little reason to take a unit of 5 ever, so you generally always want to be taking these guys at least unit of 15, probably more likely pushing them towards their max unit of 20. So that's kind of where you want to be taking these guys from a size point of view. You've got extended carapaces, which is worth covering, and I'm going to cover it for a reason that we'll talk about later. But you can take extended carapaces on these guys. It will give them a 4-up save. They normally only have a 5-up save, so it gives them a slightly better save standardly. They have got a 5-up invuln built in, so most of the time you're probably not going to go with the you're not going to have the 4-up, because they do then lose the opportunity to charge after they've advanced, which is one of their keys. But saying that, there are different ways to tactically bring these guys in, so that's why it's worth just remembering that extended carapace, because we will talk about that later. The other thing that it's important to just kind of very briefly touch on, and it is something that is a viable tactic, is you have the Infestation Nodes. So for taking a unit of these guys, you can place 4 Infestation Nodes into your deployment zone instead of setting them up. Now that does mean then, particularly if you're deploying on a battle map that doesn't have a lot of cover, and you have guys and you have units of these that you potentially are going to get shot up really quickly, by doing that means you don't have to deploy them, means that they're not going to get shot until you start to move them. The caveat for that is if the enemy gets within 9 inches, and 9 inches is quite a far way away, then that node is destroyed. So when you're using these infestation nodes, you just need to bear in mind what sort of opponent you're playing. Are you playing an opponent that you know that turn 1 your opponent is going to be very close and potentially is going to be destroying nodes? Because if he is, don't use them. Get your guys on the table, get them hidden the best way you possibly can. You know, cross your fingers, hope for the best, because if your opponent is going to be able to get to these guys reliably, you do not want them destroying all those nodes and finding you can't pop your Genestealers out. Now, that's very rarely going to be the case, and if you're a smart player and deploy your nodes carefully, you're probably going to be fine. But you will be surprised how many armies can get in your face so quickly. And if you're playing the wrong deployment, so you've got small deployment zones, then potentially you could get pushed onto those nodes pretty quickly with things like consolidations and pile-ins. So be careful. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about how we take these guys. So we've discussed around, we're going to be taking them in units. In units of 15 to 20, that's the way to take them. We've discussed about the kind of the layout of these guys and how we take them. So we're going to take them with Scything Talons, and we're going to take them with Rending Claws, making sure that we chuck in a few of the Acid Maws on there. So now let's talk a little bit about what kind of detachments we take them in. What sort of tactics do we play with them? Okay, so let's start with kind of build and how we want to kind of build an army with these guys. So first of all, I probably wouldn't advise you taking just one unit, because everybody has a bit of a stigma around Genestealers, and when your opponent sees them on the table, he's going to know he needs to deal with them. And if you've ever shot at Genestealers, you know they tend to die pretty quickly. So if there's a unit on the table that is 1, pretty squishy, and 2, can do a lot of damage, then your average competitive player is going to make sure he sees them off pretty quickly, particularly taking them below danger level, so taking them below 10 in their unit. So bearing that in mind, you're probably not going to want to take just one unit. You're going to want to take at least 2 units, preferably probably 3 units of these guys, to make sure that you're maximising your threats to your opponent, because you want to be hitting them on multiple fronts, and you want to be making them make decisions, and you want to be being aggressive with these guys. So for a start, you probably want to be taking, I would say, the minimum of say 2 units of 20, but you might look at maybe taking 3 units of 15 or 3 units of 20 if you're going to kind of go full on. Probably not too many more than that. You can do, and you can try and play that game, but then if you come across the wrong type of matchups, you're going to get seen off pretty quickly. So you're probably looking at 3 solid big banks of Genestealers to be your kind of strength there, and they're going to do a lot of your heavy lifting and a lot of your aggressive work on the board. So as far as what hive fleets to go for, now this is probably one of your easiest decisions on the whole, because there's one hive fleet that is pretty much dedicated to these guys, and that is the Kraken. Now the Kraken is so good because when you advance with Hive Fleet Kraken, you don't just roll 1 dice, you roll 3 dice and you pick the highest. That means if you're bearing in mind that these Genestealers can always move, and then they can advance, and then they can charge, it means you've got a good chance of getting that 6 for the advance, which means those Genestealers are going to be even farther forward from an aggressive point of view. So it's really, really good. It also means, you know, that these guys can break back from combat and charge something else. So for instance, if they hit a roadblock that's stopping them from getting to where they need to, they can hit that unit, they can cause it some trouble, they can tie it, and then next turn they can then belt into something else, disengage from combat, and then belt into a higher value target. So Kraken altogether is just the way to take these guys, almost certainly, but I will touch on a few other little tactical approaches to taking Genestealers, because there are some still interesting ones to go for. So one that's nice is the Behemoth. So the Behemoth Hive Fleet will mean that you can reroll charges. That's not bad if you bear in mind that these guys are pretty quick. So they're getting there and then making sure they get that reliable charge off is handy, really handy. And this also comes in nicely if you're using them in in conjunction with Trigons that are potentially bringing them in. So they're using the Trigon to come up from the ground, and then they're then getting reroll charges. That's going to really up their odds of getting in and making that 9-inch charge. So I don't think it's worth discounting, because you could very much use that tactical approach, and it's not a bad way of running them. Leviathan, not bad as well, giving you that 6 up, so a 5 up, 6 up makes them a little bit more survivable, but still they're going to get chewed through pretty quick, so probably not the best. Hydra is okay. So Hydra, you can re-roll hit rolls in the fight phase for the unit. If the unit contains fewer models than your own, you'll probably outnumber most of the time with a Genestealer, so it's not too bad, but again, it's not the best. But the other one that's worth thinking about is your Jormungandr. One day I'll be able to pronounce that, guys. But basically, the reason why this is quite a good one for them is, and I'm going to go back to that kind of extended carapace. So the Jormungandr, what it means is that you get +1 to their cover save, right? So basically, and that's out in the open. So they get that standard, so they get +1 to their save, basically. Now, they don't get it if they advance or charge, but what it does mean is if you want these guys a little bit more tactically advancing, you can get them up to a 3 up, which is not to be dismissed. It's going to make them a lot more survivable, but you are going to lose that speed element, which I think is what they're all about. So I wouldn't take it for that reason, but it's definitely something that you could look into and play around with, and potentially could be advantageous. You know, coming out of tunnels, lurking around with 3 up save is not too bad, but I would say overall Kraken is 100% the way you want to build these guys if you're going heavy Genestealer. So let's now talk a little bit about the key stratagems which will really help your Genestealers be mega effective in your army. So guys, we're going to start off with Metabolic Overdrive, and this is an interesting one. It's a useful one. It's what I would call your kind of your second Genestealer one. This is the one that puts your second unit ready to pounce next turn. So it's a great little one to chuck in there. But the Metabolic Overdrive, what it does is use a stratagem in the movement phase. After moving your Tyranid unit from your army, you can make a second move, which includes advancing if you wish, but you must roll a dice. For each model in the unit, any roll as 1 inflicts a mortal wound on the unit. The unit can't shoot or make a charge move in that turn. So for a start, let me put a caveat in there. Make sure you have a unit of 20 for this. You don't want to be using it on units that are risky, that you're going to again take some strength out of this unit. And also what I would do with this unit is I would have cast Catalyst on them as well. So you're going to get that save. You're going to get that lovely little save against those mortal wounds to try and keep a few more of these guys alive. And also bearing in mind that they're not going to be charging. These are the guys that are going to be out there in the wind and that are going to potentially be in trouble if they don't get that charge. So giving them kind of Catalyst as your second wave is not a bad way, because it just means that they will be your second hit on the next turn if these guys are unlikely to get close to the fight, which they probably won't do if your opponent has deployed properly. So that's your first one. The other one to be very, very to have in your mindset. So this isn't necessarily a tactic, but this is something that you want to always have in mind, and that is feeder Tendrils. So basically, use this stratagem when a Genestealer, Lictor, or Toxgreen or Venomthrope from your army kills a character in the fight phase. Gain D3 command points. Now this is the only way in the Tyranid Codex that we can gain command points back. So by having a lot of Genestealers, you giving yourself more of an opportunity to get your command points back. Now bear in mind, it's not always easy to get to characters, and these Genestealers are probably not at first going to be taking characters out. And what you'll find with Genestealers, as I'm going to kind of talk about in the summary more of this video, is they do fall down incredibly quickly. So the chances of them absolutely killing off characters is maybe not going to happen, but if you get an opportunity to kill a character, pop this stratagem, because what's the worst that's going to happen is you're going to get that command point back, so you might as well use it. So use that, try and get yourself some command points. Really handy little command point. Okay, so moving on. Right, so I'm going to come back to one called Overrun, because I think that's very interesting. But before I go into that, I want to talk about the key one. And the key one is called Opportunistic Advance. Easy to say for some. Now this is a Kraken only stratagem. So going back to that, this type of unit really favours being Kraken. And what this does is use a stratagem in your movement phase when you roll a dice for advancing Kraken units other than a unit with fly. You can then double the number you roll and add it to the total of the move characteristics for the movement phase, rather than following the normal rules for advancing. So what that means is, because you're Kraken, you're rolling 3 dice for that advance, so you've got a good chance of getting that 6, and then you're doubling that 6 to 12. So you straight away can see the immense speed that these guys are going to have. So that unit is going to be absolutely well and truly in charge range turn 1 easily. That's frightening and extremely powerful. You're going to be using this every single turn you can, every single game you can, and this is really what makes the Genestealers work so effectively well within the Codex, because you are hitting their line exactly where you want to, and that's amazing. So that is very powerful, and that's the really one to be using. Now, what I wanted to come back to, which I think is a very interesting one, and something that is very dangerous and something not to be underestimated, and that one is called Overrun. So Overrun, use a stratagem when a Tyranid unit from your army destroys a unit in the fight phase and is not within 3 inches of another enemy unit. Instead of consolidating, this unit can move and advance as if it was the movement phase, but it cannot move in 1 inch of an enemy model. So you might think, well, you know, well, I can't charge, I can't get within 1 inch, it's not that great, but actually 40k is a game of mobility. It's a game of ball possession, ball dominance, and that's where that comes in, because what you're doing is, if you can wipe out a unit, you are then putting those Genestealers in a great position for next turn, either piling on a load of pressure, or jumping onto an objective, or stopping something from coming in from reserve, which is a very, very handy tactic, because you can start to spread those Genestealers out, really trying to take ground, be aggressive, and give your opponent something to worry about. That is amazing in itself. So there are other stratagems that you can use within here that will be handy, but when we're talking about a competitive Genestealer army, those are the ones you're really going to be using, and are going to be using very, very effectively to really make that Genestealer unit really strong. Now the kind of the last thing that I wanted to touch before I summarise on this video is I wanted to talk about the Broodlord, because the Broodlord is pretty much instrumental in making these Genestealers really work effectively. So the Broodlord in himself, and I'm not going to go into the Broodlord because I could do a whole other video on the Broodlord, but the Broodlord is a bit of a killing machine himself, so taking a Broodlord is never a bad thing. He's quite expensive, and does mean a little bit of investment in points, but he's a character, he's not going to get shot at. It means that, though, all importantly, this is the key thing: Genestealer units within 6 inches of the Broodlord add 1 to the hit rolls. So Genestealers normally hit on 3s, so they'll suddenly hit on 2s. If you're using the Scything Talons, suddenly these Genestealers are not only hitting on 2s, they're hitting on 2s rerolling 1s. Now that's not bad. So if you're going against something with an invon save, all those bag load of attacks are going to hit. And that's crazy, crazy good. Now yes, you know, there's no guarantee that they're necessarily going to wound, and obviously if they're not rending, then maybe they're not going to do as much damage, but you're going to get a mass amount of attacks on chaff with invon saves. You know, Brimstone Horrors, things like that. Now obviously Brimstone Horrors are not as effective as they used to be, but just being able to clear big units with pretty much relying on your invon saves is incredible. Or if not, just mass loads of attacks is then going to give you more chance of you getting those 6s for that -4, and just bag loads of attacks. So it's really, really powerful for that point of view. Also, we talked a little bit earlier about that, getting that catalyst off. You know, the Broodlord running beside the Genestealers, and then he's making sure that he's within range to cast that catalyst to give these guys a 5-up, feel no pain after save roll, and that is very, very handy as well. And then when he needs to get involved, this guy can run in and he can cause havoc. He's a bit of a killing machine in himself. So not one to be underestimated, and because he's a character, he's going to sit there. He's also very quick. He's the same speed as the Genestealers, and that in itself, though, can be his biggest flaw. Is the fact that potentially with the other stratagems that you're going to be using on your Genestealer units, your Broodlord could get left behind. So you need to be a bit careful with that, and you need to be a bit strategic with how you place him. But if you can afford him, I think, you know, it's worth taking. If you go with 3 units, don't probably take him, because you're investing so many points in those. You're just going to go with mass amount of attacks, mass amount of bodies in your opponent's face, make something stick. If you're going with maybe 2, you're then going to spend your extra points on the Broodlord to make sure those 2 are a little bit more effective. So it's around, ultimately, like anything, guys, it's just around working out where the best strategic place to place your points in. Because we'd all like lots and lots of stuff in our armies, but you have to kind of work out where that kind of magic number is. Where is the point where that tactic becomes a liability? Where is the point where that becomes at its maximum effectiveness? And that's kind of where I would say it is. If you sit him with sort of 2 solid units, probably pretty good. If you have a Broodlord and 3 units, then what you're saying is this army totally revolves around this Genestealer tactic, and then potentially you're giving your opponent an easy, I'm going to take out that. And maybe they will, maybe they won't. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But that would be my advice. If you disagree and you think, look, never leave home without the Broodlord, chuck him in, doesn't matter how many you've got, always have him with the Broodlord. If you've got 3, even more reason to have him, well, you know, there's a valid argument behind that as well. Love to hear your points in the comments below. But the Broodlord, definitely a very good, useful unit to have around if you are taking your Genestealers. So overall, how would I take my Genestealers? So the best way to take it is actually taking them in coordination with the Genestealer cult and taking them with their Genestealers. And the reason why that is because their Genestealers have other ways to get in your opponent's face quickly, i.e. they can cult ambush, which means that then you have not just one unit with almost a guaranteed charge, which is the one that you use the stratagem on, the one that you're marching forward, the one that you're charging your opponent with, but you also have a good chance of getting a further 1, almost definitely, and 2 if you get lucky. So that's 3 units, big units of Genestealers that are going to hit your opponent's lines. Now I'm not going to talk a lot about the Genestealer cult because I want in these videos to really focus on your Tyranid tactics and exactly how to use a Tyranid army, but just to kind of let you know and throw it out there. So the most competitive way to take a heavy Genestealer based army is with use of the Genestealer cult to really put the pressure on and really maximise use of them. But saying that, it's not a bad option to take a couple of solid units of Genestealers, a couple of big units, probably 20s, take it with a Broodlord, and then put that in combination with some Hive Tyrants, maybe some Morlocks, maybe some Hive Guard, maybe some Biovores, and then give your opponent multiple different challenges to face. So given the risk of having something in their face turn 1, and something that will really cause them trouble, but then multiply that with the risk of a Hive Tyrant that's also going to be shooting loads, it's going to be jumping around, being a nuisance, Biovores that are doing multiple mortal wounds and that are congesting the board with spore mines, and then potentially a Morlock that's going to kind of jump up there in the backfield as well, that's going to be giving them multiple challenges. The way that I always believe Tyranids work the best is when we have multiple threats in your opponent's face. That's the best way to play a Tyranid army. You can play it in lots of different ways, and we've focused a lot about them in different videos and we'll continue to do that. But the way to play Tyranids successfully is multiple threats that the opponent has to deal with at the same time. Because one, that makes them make mistakes, because they've got to prioritise absolutely correctly, and it's congestion of threats. So yes, if you lose 1, if you lose 2, if you lose 3, as long as you've got another 3 that are going to come in and also do damage, ultimately you will win the battle of attrition and you will win the game. And that's the crucial key bit of playing Tyranids. In 8th edition it was pretty much the same as 7th, it just worked really well now. So hopefully that video has been helpful for you guys. The next video coming at you very soon with more Tyranid tactics. But if you like this, again, please do subscribe to the channel, please do share it with all your friends, and chuck a comment below, it helps me loads. And thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.